Well, here's another addition to the truck. It is a Mopar Performance mechanical oil pressure gauge. I used everything that came with the kit, including the nylon tubing. I did not go with the steel braided lines or isolator. Real good gauge. I got it from Mopar Superstore or Supercenter. Sorry, they were cheap as I could find. The shipping is a little bit high, but it still came out cheaper than anybody else that I purchased from. It's a full sweep gauge. It lights up blue at night. I wanted to go with the Autometer Dodge factory gauge, but they did not have a full sweep oil pressure gauge. They only had a full sweep trans temp gauge. Alrighty. The gauge pillar that I have is an Autometer from Summit Racing. The back here just showing you the connections to the gauge. The bracket on the back of the gauge, you can see I kind of ground down at it on both sides. You can't see the other side, but that allows it to get into the pod a lot easier and a lot smoother. That way you can tighten down the bolts and not have the pod pushing out on the corners. But as you see there, the nylon tubing goes into the back of the gauge. I do have tape on it to keep it from leaking. So again, Teflon tape is on it to keep it from leaking. I have a black and red wire coming into the truck. The red wire, I will show you later on in the video, it goes to accessory on fuse, and the black wires have it ground to the left fender. And then from there, I tapped into both the black and the red wire with the quick connects. And I'm gonna do that for the other two gauges that I buy, trans temp and also air fuel ratio gauge. Let's look under the hood real quick. Show you how everything's hooked up. Again, here's the red wire coming through. I have it connected to that fuse there, fuse number 28, which that is the cluster overhead fuse. Only comes on when the ignition is on. The bottom fuse there, number 10, is the factory fuse. Number 5 is going to the gauges. Your black wire here is going to the fender, to the just a regular factory ground. Easy connection. The nylon tubing goes to the same boot here. Comes all the way down under the brake booster. Runs parallel to the left cylinder head. Goes behind the oil pressure dipstick in front of the intake. Beside the alternator. Right by the EGR valve. I'm about to probably work on this a little bit. The covering I have on it keeps melting because of the heat of the EGR valve. So I'm about to figure something out because it's gonna finally eat through that and get to the nylon tubing, which is gonna cause a mess. And then lastly, hopefully I can get a shot of this. Oh. There's the connection the oil pressure gauge and the factory sensor. So the oil pressure gauge is on the top, and the factory unit is coming straight out, going towards the radiator. Let's start it up real quick. Let's just take a look at the gauge, and then later on today at night I'll do another quick clip of the gauge at night.
We've got just under 1,200.
During idle, doing cold warm up, I usually get between 40 and 50 psi. As far as normal operating psi, it's usually between 40 and 50. After it warms up, the idle psi is usually around 30. And then once I get up to around 2,500 RPM and above, I usually get around 60 psi. This is my first gauge installed, but overall, an hour at the most maybe to get it all installed and all hooked up. There's the oil going in. It looks black just like the wire. No leaks. I know people are gonna say they don't like mechanical gauges, but oh well. I'm trying to stay cheap. I like to go against the grain and see if something works. Quite honestly, it should not leak as long as you don't have the pipe running against hot items. And I'm gonna try to get that fixed as far as the EGR valve so it doesn't melt through. But other than that, quite honestly, it should not leak at all. Tighten that grommet down with the ferrule as tight as you can. That'll crimp that into the gauge. Do the same thing to where the oil pressure sender is. You should not have any leaks. So right now we're sitting at idle on the cold startup, around about 52 psi. I'm gonna run it up to about 2,000. So about 2,000, we're getting about 60 psi on cold warm up. Cold startup. Alrighty. Come back in a few with a nighttime clip of it, and hopefully the engine will be warm then and the PSI will be a little bit lower. Here we go, nighttime shot of the Mopar oil pressure gauge. Right now, as you see, the factory gauges are on. They have a green tint to them, or actually green light in the back. So when I turn on the accessories, Mopar gauge comes on. Blue with the orange needle. A little bit different than, well, a lot different than the factory green. Autometer does make a Dodge factory match color for all the gauges except for the oil pressure gauge. So that's the reason why I got I got this one, and I'm gonna get a trans temp gauge for the next pod. I really do like the Dodge Autometer factory gauges because it transitions the color all the way over to the gauge pod. So if you want anything other than an oil pressure gauge, I would definitely highly recommend the Autometer factory gauge gauges. Exact factory match. Start it up again real quick for you. And that's it. Again, a cold start. So we're back at about 50 psi. Again, normally with normal running oil pressure temp, it runs about 30 to 40 psi. Any questions, just send me a message on YouTube or send me an email.